You are listening to I Am Interchange.
I am interchange.
I am interchange.
I am Interchange.
Fostering curiosity, education, and empathy by exploring the controversial and the provocative.
I am interchange.
Ed Stafman grew up in New York City, surrounded by diversity in the boroughs of Brooklyn and Queens. After attending law schools, both in the States and in Holland, he began his career focused on civil rights law and criminal defense, particularly in death penalty work. He grew up in a secular Jewish family, but after a moving experience at a spiritual retreat, he wound down his law practice and was ordained as a rabbi. He served as a rabbi at Congregation Beth Shalom until his recent retirement. Despite his affinity and appreciation for the riches of Judaism, he believes religious law is divisive and supports a Palestinian state. From his perspective, the often extreme and even violent policies of Israel's far-right government towards Palestinians in the West Bank are more aligned with a separatist group than democratic leadership. Ed has also spent time on the Mexican border, where he witnessed Central American refugees from gang violence spend up to 5 years in prison upon seeking asylum in the United States. He believes it's our responsibility on a humane and democratic level to provide refuge to those fleeing harm.
We did a lot of our humanizing by sitting and listening to their stories and coming to an understanding about why they're there and why they're fleeing, or in some cases why they've been deported. So there's people going both ways. Yeah, so there's almost as many people there who've recently been deported as there are people who are coming and trying to get into the United States.
Join me in welcoming Ed to the show. We'll dive into how immigrants are actually key to many sectors of our economy, why it's short-sighted for politicians to demonize certain groups to support their agendas, and how labeling the other puts us on a dangerous path to dehumanization. Whistle Pig Korean is an affordable, laid-back spot where Bozeman residents can experience traditional Korean dishes. Personally, I love the infusion of new culture and new ideas to the Bozeman mix. It's what I Am Interchange is all about. And since the fastest way to the heart is through my stomach, I Am Interchange supports Whistle Pig Korean and their spread of unique recipes. Hey, how's it going, Ed?
Good.
Good seeing you.
Nice to be with you, Tate.
You're on our upcoming Compassion versus Practicality event, and I'm really looking forward to having you there. There's lots of interesting polarities around the topic. This interview is to help our audience get to know you a little bit more. We can start it off. What were you like as a kid growing up? All the way back.
I was just a kid. I'd like to play baseball. I was a Mets fan. I played the violin.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in New York.
New York, okay.
I had almost zero exposure to anything outside of the immediate neighborhood, you know.
Yeah, okay. So just because you were a kid, you didn't have transportation anywhere, and you had enough in that area. Were you in any particular borough?
Yeah, I lived in Brooklyn, and then later on in Queens. Yeah, went to high school at Brooklyn Technical High School. It was kind of my first exposure to people of other cultures.
Interesting. In that high school experience?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Because it was there are some special high schools in New York that you test into. Really controversial right now, but then it wasn't nearly as controversial. So there were people from all over the city, from all different areas, and racially, ethnically diverse, except it was all boys. So not so gender diverse. Right?
And they all tested into it.
Yeah, and my senior year actually was the year they admitted the first women.
Wow.
2.
How was that?
Oh, it was kind of weird because there were 2 women and 6,000 boys.
Gosh. How
So now, of course, it's co-ed and
so
so on,
surreal.
but that was when it was just beginning. You know?
Yeah, breaking those gender stereotypes. Where did you end up after New York? Did you go to college in New York?
I went to the State University of New York at Stony Brook undergrad school, and then I went to law school at Gonzaga for 1 year, and then the World Academy of International Law in Holland for a semester.
Great.
And then I finished up my law education at Florida State University College of Law. Practiced law for 25 years, civil rights and criminal defense, especially death penalty work, and ended up going back to school and getting ordained as a rabbi. It took 8 years. It's a 5-year program, but I was part-time at first.
Oh, okay, so you didn't get as many credits as you...
Right, it took a little longer because I was sort of winding down my law practice as I was starting my rabbinical training.
What made you want to switch?
I had been a secular Jew most of my life. My family was basically secular. And I went to a spiritual retreat and discovered that the riches of Judaism, and it really moved me.
Spiritually?
Yeah, it opened my heart in ways that I didn't know were possible. And I wasn't sure whether it was real or not, so I had to go back a few more times to started going to more and more of these retreats, and then decided eventually that I wanted it to be my life's work. There was nothing wrong with my law career. It was flourishing. But it was time for a change. And so I did that. And then after I was ordained, I immediately became the rabbi in Bozeman, where I spent 10 years as the rabbi till I retired 6 months ago, and now I'm rabbi emeritus.
You filled your soul by making that change?
It was definitely a soulful, you might say, shift. I don't know about filled my soul, but
yeah, okay.
It was a new direction.
Well, I wanted to talk with you about a little bit about the immigration with Palestine and the Jewish community. I know it is a little bit far-fetched from our topic, but I'm hoping to see if we can land it somewhere similarly-ish.
Okay.
With immigration. I know this is a loaded topic. Can you lead me through kind of a brief history of Palestine and the Jewish community?
Well, Palestine has had many names over the ages. So if we go back to, say, the time of Jesus, it was called Judea, and it had been the homeland and birthplace of the Jewish people for 1,500 years at that point. Along the way, there'd been a couple of exiles. In 586 was the big one, where many of the Jews were exiled to Babylonia, but then returned about the year 500, and were exiled again in the year 70 by the Romans. Mostly Jews went to. There were already a good many Jews in North Africa, especially Egypt, but many Jews were exiled to Europe, wherever there was the Roman Empire. Sometimes as slaves. Some Jews were able to stay. The Romans actually allowed a Jewish academy to be set up in the city of Yavna. And so it had always been considered from that, it had been, and then from there on became sort of in the mind of Jews as the homeland. Never lost that status. It's referred to in all the prayers that are from that time period as the homeland. In another couple of weeks, we'll be celebrating the annual Passover Seder, which always ends with next year in Jerusalem. So it remained this sort of strong piece of consciousness for 2,000 years, and there also remained a Jewish presence, but a small one. So over the next 2,000 years, it's a long and complicated history, but essentially the area is ruled by different countries at different times. If we fast forward after the Roman Empire, the big occupier is the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire it's still not Palestine. It's a province of the Ottoman Empire, and after World War I, when the Ottoman Empire basically dissolves, there are populations there, mostly Muslims, some Christian, who start to be called Palestinians. At no point does it become a country in the sense of that we think of countries
like a state,
yeah, in the modern world, but it nevertheless becomes a people in the same way we think of the Crow Native Americans or Sioux or any other native. They're more like a native people than they are a country with court records of who owns what, and a judicial system and an election system that didn't exist because for many years it was ruled by the Ottoman Empire, and before that the Roman Empire.
Who was there like in the very beginning? Were there indigenous Arabs or?
There were. So there's always been indigenous people there. I mean, before the Jews, there were the Canaanites, who were an indigenous people. So after the Ottoman Empire falls, Jordan sort of loosely exercises control over the area, but never really solidifies it. After the Holocaust, and a third of the Jewish population of the world being murdered, Europe becomes completely inhospitable, and Jews are essentially jumping out of a burning house.
Because they don't have a homeland anymore. They don't have...
they're getting out of concentration camps,
Yeah.
and everything they've had was confiscated, and for many reasons, they have to get the heck out of Europe. And so for many of them, the natural place to go was Israel, which in their minds at that time was uninhabited.
But it wasn't.
Well, right. So it was uninhabited in the same sense that the European explorers came to the United States and said it's uninhabited. And there had been actually Jews there already. And the Zionist movement of beginning to move to Israel actually started well before the Holocaust, started in the middle of the 19th century, as persecution of Jews in the 19th century started picking up in Europe.
Kind of in Russia.
And all of Eastern Europe particularly.
So that's when the Zionist movement picked up. They didn't have any land, but they wanted to create a nation.
Right. Well, they'd always considered themselves a nation without a land. And in fact, one of the slogans was a land without a people for a people without a land. But remember, it's a different consciousness then, right? About native peoples in particular. And so you might say that Jews jumped out of a burning house and didn't realize they were landing on somebody else. But if you're jumping out of a burning house, you're not worried about who you're going to land on. You get out of the house, right? I didn't make up that expression. It was actually the words of a former speaker of the Congress, the Knesset of Israel. And so as time went on, we came to the realization of kind of what had happened. And it was also a period back then where Western colonization was still a thing of Africa and Asia and so on. It was on its way out, but so from the point of view of the Palestinians who were living there, the native culture, it looked just like colonialism. From the point of view of the Jews, they were jumping out of a burning building, so it's a little different.
They didn't have a choice.
They're a little different than the colonialism that we saw from Europe in the 18th century, say.
Yeah, weren't people fleeing British rule? The Irish were scrutinized heavily.
In some cases, in American people were fleeing, but it was also well financed by monarchs in Europe to come here, and so it's not quite the same because it was mostly people fleeing for their lives. Anyway, it led to conflict and a series of wars
that are still happening.
Not really.
There's no conflict?
There's conflict, but not really wars like there were. This was wars where the Jews were horribly outnumbered in every aspect of soldiers and money and no, I'm talking about when they were the first war for independence in 1967. Some people still think of it as a for 1947, and then the second one in 67, and then the Yom Kippur War in 73, I think it is. All of these wars, it's sort of nobody understands how the Jews won, because they were outmanned, outnumbered, outweaponed, but they did. And one of the things that happened was Palestinians were expelled, if you like. Now, some people will say that they left voluntarily and headed to Gaza or the West Bank, the ones that lived in what is now Israel proper. Many of them left, and the circumstances are disputed historically. Many of them left voluntarily, but they were told by their leaders, the Jewish forces are coming, we need to get out, we can come back in a few weeks.
So leave or get forced out, but you can come back.
And for every city, there's another story about how it happened. But anyway, most of the native population moved to either what's now called the West Bank or to Gaza. And although 20% of Israel's current population are Muslims, are original Palestinians, within Israel proper. Right, so not everybody was forced out.
They just didn't want to leave, so they kind of stuff
Well, in
that
certain
roots in.
places, like I say, every city's got a different story. In certain places, they were permitted to stay. And so Israel became a country and became a state in the Western sense of that word, and ended up occupying Israel, the West Bank and Gaza for defensive reasons initially, because they just won a war and the Palestinians weren't going down without a fight and continued the hostilities. As time went on, there started to be a consensus in both Israel, Palestine, and the world for a two-state solution, where what's now currently Israel would become Israel, the Jewish state, the Palestinians there could stay, and then the West Bank and Gaza would become Palestine.
So share the area formally.
Yeah, that there'd be two states in the
Yeah.
Western sense and so on.
So what about Jerusalem?
So Jerusalem would be a shared city, and there had been many different proposals for how that would work over time. But they've never been able to come to an agreement.
How do you feel about it?
I think
Should Jerusalem be the capital of both?
Yes, I feel it should be. There's a big Palestinian presence, always has been. There's Palestinian holy sites there. At first, the Palestinians were the obstacle to the two-state solution. At first, they denied Israel's right to exist. They maintained that Israel was a colonial power and had no right to be there. But as time shifted, and Israel became more of a right-wing government.
This is after World War II.
Oh, this is well after World War II. We're talking now into the 1980s.
Right. Okay.
And as the right wing Israel started off as a socialist country, more or less, right? And it shifted to what's now a far right country. And so somewhere about 1980s, Israel made gestures of peace, but really wasn't interested because they felt they could get the whole thing. And so they started encouraging and subsidizing settlers, Jewish, mostly far right.
Zionists.
No, a Zionist is a different thing. They could be Zionists, but Zionist is not about conquering the land from others. This is a kind of radical.
Zionists were kind of radical.
Not radical in the sense of taking
land.
land from others, stealing land. These settlers come in and they set up illegal outposts, and then the government eventually legalized them. And so now within the West Bank, 20-30% of the population are Jewish settlements.
Do you align with the Jewish settlements? And
No, I completely oppose them.
you do?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
How would you, if you were in charge, how would you navigate Israel right now?
Well,
With all the pressure
we'd have
around
a
it.
two-state solution.
Shared capital.
Shared capital. A certain number. Another big issue is the right of return for Palestinian refugees back from 1947, 48, and we'd have some kind of arrangement where a certain number of people could return, perhaps some reparations, because their land was confiscated and their homes were confiscated. Probably involve some third countries, which would take some of those. There are still people living in refugee camps that have been in refugee camps for three generations now.
That's so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Living your entire life.
So we'd be, figuring out a solution for that. But there's no will for it. And ironically, it's now shifted so that the far right of Israel favors a one-state solution where they basically annex the West Bank.
Yeah, and you're not for that.
It's a terrible solution because, among other things, if the West Bank was annexed, the country would then become about 50% Jewish and 50% Muslim or Arab, give or take a few percent. Needless to say, if you want to have a democracy and 50% of the people are Arab, they've got to be able to vote and their voices are going to be included.
Yeah, that's
and
hard.
especially given birth rates, in a decade, it's liable to be a majority Arab country.
So it would be counterintuitive to their goal if they did that.
Well, unless they intend to have apartheid, where there's no democratic votes for Palestinians, and that's sort of the agenda. Or they would set up a series of Buddhistans, where there are Palestinian enclaves within a Jewish state, like what used to be in South Africa, and they don't get to vote. So the large number of Palestinians in the West Bank live in 8 or 10 cities.
They don't get to vote because they wouldn't be technically citizens.
Right. They'd have these
religion.
isolated cities within Jewish state, and they would have self-rule. This was the situation in South Africa, right? It's the definition of apartheid. And even if they'd have self-rule, the Israeli army would be permitted, as they are now, to go in there and enforce security things and so on. And that's where Israel is headed. And Israel was founded as both a Jewish and a democratic state. The democratic piece is slowly being disassembled in many ways.
Because they're afraid of Sharia law.
No.
Because they're afraid that if they give the vote to half of the Muslim citizens,
That they'll elect Muslims, then they hate Muslims.
right? But then that would bring Sharia law. Yeah.
It's not a question of Sharia law. Look, Jewish law, halakha, is just as bad as Sharia law.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
Just yesterday at the Western Wall, the holiest of Jewish sites, all pictures of women were blacked out.
So it's just as extreme.
It's just as extreme. I mean, if it's followed like it was in the Middle Ages, which is what
Word for word.
when you talk about Sharia law, what you're and the fear factor of it, you're assuming it'll be followed as it was in the Middle Ages, right? Not as it's followed today. And the same with halakha, which is the equivalent in Judaism. If it's followed like it is in the Middle Ages with respect to women's rights, with respect to how you treat others who aren't of your religion and so on, then it can be pretty horrific. But very few, only a small minority of Jews and a very small minority of Muslims see their respective laws that way. There are Islamophobes who want to talk about Sharia law as if it's the Middle Ages and then get us to fear it. But that's, if you talk to Dr. Amin, for example, who's the leader of the Muslim community in Bozeman, he'd say Sharia law is simply how I live my life, how I respect God, how I'm humble, and all those kind of qualities that you would think are admirable, which are all part of Sharia law. This nonsense that somehow we're going to conquer the world, that's the Middle Ages thing. By the way, we see that in Christian law too, if we're looking at Catholic law, right?
Yeah. So they've all evolved and softened over time? Substantially?
Yes, but there's still a small minority that thinks it's the Middle Ages.
And they get the press that is kind of, it builds that fear.
And all
cultures.
three and not only Western religions, all religions have those extremes, right? And if you're going to compare, you have to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. You can't compare my ideal with your reality, or my reality with your ideal, right? So people want to take the most extreme version of Sharia law that's practiced by only, 0.25% of Muslims and compare that to Jewish law, but the kind that's practiced by 95% of Jews, which is moderate and liberal.
Right. That's interesting theology. Well, thanks for... I've been really wanting to talk to you about that.
So we have a mess there now. And
it's complicated.
It's complicated, and we got an extreme right-wing government which is supported by its counterpart in the United States, and we have an election coming up in a few days, and the moderates are making a run at it, but the far right has gotten even more extreme, and has actually formed an alliance now with a new far right party that advocates for killing or exiling all Palestinians.
You think that they're going to go for it all?
Well, that's an extreme of the current right, but it had been an illegal party before, and the U.S. calls them that party a terrorist organization. They can't come into the United States.
The organization that we're aligned with,
so the right wing in Israel is a coalition. There was, on the far extreme, there was a far right party that was excluded from the coalition as a terrorist organization. They support killing Palestinians.
And they're still involved.
Well, they've just been legitimized and invited into the current government.
Because of how far right it's been swinging.
And with an election coming up, they need to encourage the right wing to vote, and so they brought those people in.
So do you think that voice should be suppressed? Where does your compassion for them run out?
When they advocate violence against other people based on based on their ethnicity or race, or
That's where compassion runs out for you.
that's an easy one,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it runs out before that, but we're talking about essentially Nazis,
Yeah.
right? It's just that the Palestinians are the Jews.
Is that hard to see your culture in that scenario?
I don't consider it my culture. I consider it
Your history?
I consider it an extreme wing that's illegitimate and is not based in anything that's Jewish. You know, I see the same problem in the United States with what's happened with a minority taking over that believes in white supremacy and is basically anti-Semitic, and but I don't think represents mainstream America at all. But through various factors, was able to win this election in 2016, and it's no longer America in the way I understand America. But I'm hopeful that will shift back.
Me too.
And that's kind of what's happened in Israel, except it's more or less the same thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I was hoping to bring that. So now we're back on North America. You spent some time on the Mexican border.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about your experience?
So there were 10 rabbis who went to spend some time there with a Jesuit group called the Kino Border Initiative. And the short of it is, we spent our days working in a comedor, like a food kitchen, a food bank kind of thing.
Sure. That serves warm food.
Yeah. And we'd breakfast and lunch of about 200 people at each meal.
And these are the caravans coming up from...
There's no
Honduras
caravans. The caravans are a myth, right?
There aren't groups of people coming up
Well,
through...
where we were, there were no caravans, right? It was in Nogales. There were a few small caravans that went to Tijuana. But caravans are simply immigrants who are traveling together for their own safety. You know, when the Jews left Egypt escaping slavery, you could say we're a caravan, or you could say we're immigrants who didn't want to be killed on the path, and so we traveled together for safety.
Well, no, I get it. It's just how caravans were how it was framed.
In
coming up.
Nogales, for example, where I was, there are no caravans. It's just individual families showing up.
So you were there working in a kitchen food bank.
Right, but it was much more than that. It was we did teaching of migrants. We did a lot of our humanizing by sitting and listening to their stories and coming to an understanding about why they're there and why they're fleeing, or in some cases why they've been deported. So there's people going
From the
both
US?
ways. Yeah, so there's almost as many people there who've recently been deported as there are people who are coming and trying to get into the United States. Or why they might try to cross the border illegally in some cases. So we want to hear their stories and see what's going on in their lives so we can humanize them and share those stories. And we also go to accompany. That is, to let them know that they're not alone, because these are people who, in many cases, have left everything they have. They've left their home, they've left their job, they've left their community, and all they got is what they can carry on their back. And their family, if they're there with a family. And that's if you think about what that would be like, to suddenly not have a home, not have any possessions except
Community.
not have a community, not have a job, it's terrifying. And to let them know that they have support, and especially when all the news is, you're a rapist, you're a murderer, we don't want.
That paints a pretty bleak picture for just a family that you just described.
And almost overwhelmingly, at least the people we met, are running for their lives, much like those Jews who were jumping out of a burning building. And they describe the situation, why that is. There are gangs, and the gangs have all sorts of ways of, they extort money from you, they take your land, they take your produce if you're a farmer, they take your children. They'll go into the schools, and your boys can either join the gang, or if they refuse, we start to execute them. Met many people who had family members killed by these gangs.
Kind of you're with us or against us. Are they Mexican gangs?
Well, there are 35 border crossings. We were at one in Nogales, and the people and that week, the people who were there were mostly Mexicans from the southern province of Guerrero, and the gangs were Mexican gangs. But in other border stations, there are people coming from Guatemala and Honduras, and there are Honduran gangs and Guatemalan gangs.
Because that's the heavier community that's there. They align with.
It's just a question of which border crossing they're going to, which is largely a function of which one is easier to get to.
Yeah, but they'll find their own community there and kind of align more with.
No. I mean, you mean the people coming?
Hondurans and Guatemalans.
So the Hondurans, there are at least 35, 36 border crossings, and which one they go to is a function of which is the easiest to get to, and what they hear about where is it the easiest, where's your best shot at seeking asylum, because the rules are applied very differently from border crossing to border crossing. So there's a sort of informal network of rumors and information that's passed on, and you hear, well, I just met Mr. Rodriguez, and he said that his wife was able to process her asylum application in El Paso, so we should head to El Paso. And so everyone's hearing the same sort of information. So where they're going, which border station they decide to present themselves at, is a function of where they think they have the best shot. And while we were there, it just so happened to be people from the province of Guerrero. The next week, I understand, there were people from Guatemala there. So from week to week, it can change as to who's there and why they choose that particular place. And the rules are different at each place. And the rules keep on changing as to U.S. policy, that is.
Right, yeah.
And from one week to the next, it can change. And it might change at just this border crossing, but not another border crossing. And then even if there are rules, sometimes they've got to abrogate the rules because they can't enforce them. And so it's very complicated.
Yeah, it sounds complicated for sure. We're still allowing asylum seekers through the southern border, correct?
So first of all, you have to understand that asylum is a right to seek asylum under international law and under American law.
Yep.
So when you come to the border, you have to make what's called a credible claim.
That you're in danger. But there's more to actually getting asylum than just being in danger. You have to be in danger because you're in a protected class. So, for example, you're a native person, and the gangs are coming on after native people, or you're LGBT, or something like that. So only 1% of Mexicans actually win their asylum claims in the end. But what happens when they get to the border is you take a number. First of all, it's almost all families, right? There's a few that aren't, but mostly it's families. You take a number like you're going to the Department of Motor Vehicles. Is this after you're in the country?
No,
in the U.S.?
No, you have to
This
go.
is why you're on the border.
You come to the border, and you present yourself. You say, I want asylum. First, you have to get a number and wait.
Take a number, and we'll get to you when we get through.
Right, and that could be weeks or months.
Yeah. Is that bad? I mean, don't things like that take time?
Well, it would take a lot less time if we had enough border guards.
It would take a lot less time, but even if it took a week or two, where do all these people go?
So it doesn't take a week or two; it takes months usually.
Well, yeah, it takes months.
And so they hang out in the border town, and there's some shelters, and they
like
eat.
the tent and all the shelters.
Actually, in Nogales is actually decent houses. I mean, sort of where they can stay, rooms anyway, and they eat at where we feed them.
So there's some crossings that are better than others, obviously.
Well, it varies because it depends how long the wait is. And that's just to come forward and say, okay, I want asylum. And you may wait just to say that and fill out the paperwork. And then if you present a credible claim of asylum, that is a credible claim that you're subject to violence, you don't have to prove it or anything at that point. You just have to articulate it, essentially. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, there's so many people from Guerrero who are claiming that the same sort of stuff is going on there, that it's hard to believe they'd all be making it up, right?
So some fear that they're taking advantage of our system because of that, because all the stories are really similar.
Well, but they should be similar if they're true.
If they're all coming from the same place.
Yeah, if they're coming from the same place, right? So, but what's happened is the Justice Department, under Attorney General Sessions, has severely limited the number of people and the rules by which you can get asylum. So if you want to say there's a crisis at the border, it's because we created it, right? There's actually less people coming now than there have been.
Because we put a cap on the amount.
On the amount, and also on the... When I left the border, there were 300 people waiting to be processed, and they were processing 3 or 4 a day.
Wow.
So what happens anyway, once you get processed, what happens is, here again, it gets very complicated because it keeps on changing. There's different things that can happen. Normally, you're incarcerated in the United States if you're an adult.
If you come in without permission.
No, if you come in seeking asylum.
You are put into
jail.
Jail?
Yeah.
Even if you're seeking asylum?
Yeah, until your claim can be heard.
I see. So they are afraid that you'll disappear.
Exactly. So you sit in jail until your claim is adjudicated.
How else would you solve that?
Well, let me finish what.
Yeah. Okay.
Because that's the sort of the normal routine. That's for people without children who come and present themselves, and you have to wait. You sit there while your claim is litigated. Now, there's not nearly enough immigration judges, and so that means it can take as much as 5 years for your claim to be heard. And so this is what happened just this week in Texas.
So that person would just stay in jail for 5 years?
Well, in Texas, what happened this week is they don't have room in the jails anymore. So what they start to do is release them because they have no place to put them. And they were then herding them under an interstate highway.
Bridge, yeah.
Because there was no room in the jails.
They release them into the U.S. or into Mexico?
No, into the U.S. But it's kind of like an overflow valve.
Is that a problem? Is that okay?
Well, if the whole question of whether we ought to be holding them in jail in the first place is suspect, right? Because if they have children, you can't put them in jail.
Yeah, there's a law that keeps parents that says that kids can't go to an
So the Trump administration started taking children from their parents and putting the children in a children's prison.
Right, because of that law.
Right, and so that they could then put the parents in an adult prison and the children's in a children's prison. Well, that has caused these family separation issues has caused the whole... And that was only at certain crossings, right? Even though they didn't do that at every crossing. It was more or less an experiment.
Kind of the ones that... It sounded like the ones that were under the most pressure were kind of put into that circumstance.
Yeah, it's so random. To think that there's like a method to any of this it's not how it works.
Yeah, I mean, how can you possibly add a method to it?
All right, so at some border crossings, they were separating children. Now, on other border crossings, and it depends on what date you get there and which crossing you're at, if you have a sponsor, if you have children, and if you have a sponsor in the United States, like a family member,
who will come down and meet you.
You don't have to come down to meet you, but just has to say that you can stay.
I'm expecting them.
They'll support you and so on. Then you can go to where that person is and you can work and until your claim is heard. And again, that could take 5 years.
And so they develop roots in that time.
So they develop what we call equities, right? You called it roots, yeah. And if you're going to be there 5 years, what's going to happen?
It's a long time. You're going to make friends and get a job
and maybe have some children who are then American citizens. Maybe get divorced and then remarry to an American citizen. And so what happens is we've got all these families that have developed, waiting for their claim to be heard, and they've developed equities. Their kids are in school. Maybe they came here with kids who are 2 years old, and now they're 7. And they've just finished the 3rd grade, and English has become their first language. So one easy solution to some of this is more immigration judges. Triple, quadruple, whatever, I don't know the math, the number of immigration judges, so these cases can be heard in a few months rather than in a few years before they develop equities. Because if you're going to let them stay and develop equities, then it becomes unjust to send them back. But if you're going to send them back, and we could talk about whether that's a good idea, but at least you need to do it quickly before they've developed the kind of equities that make it unfair to send them back.
So are you saying even immigrants who came here illegally and built roots...
None of these people came here illegally. They came illegally.
Not currently, but people within the last... I mean, Bill Clinton was very anti-illegal alien is what he called it.
All right, well, you have to... So we have to go back. That's a different story than what's happening now. A totally different story.
Well, I understand. So people who came over in that time and set up roots and have their family here, do we just forgive them and let that go?
Yes. I mean, at this point.
So ICE is taking it too far by searching them and hunting them down?
Yes. I mean, so this, you have to understand how that happened. So prior to 1996.
Bill Clinton.
Yeah. Immigrants were mostly men.
Who came up for work.
And they can go back, and mostly they didn't want to give up their Mexican heritage and citizenship. They'd come and they'd work for a while and they'd make some money and they'd go back. And they went back and they'd get a visa. It was very easy to get a visa to come to the United States to work. And they'd go back and forth. And that was easy. Oftentimes they would overstay their visa. And if they did, all they had to do was go back to Mexico and get it extended. It was no big deal. Mm-hmm. In 1996, two things happened. The law changed so that if you overstayed your visa and went back to Mexico and tried to get an extension, you were ineligible because you overstayed it.
Isn't that breaking the rules a little bit?
Right, it's breaking the rules technically, but it was a rule that had never been enforced before then. And the second thing that happened is with Bill Clinton is they started building walls. And now all of those policies continued pretty much unfettered through the Bush years as well. I mean, they were essentially the same policies on immigration. And so what happened is these men who would go back and forth freely for decades stayed. They knew if they went back, they couldn't get their visa extended. And plus there was a wall, which they could get over easy enough. But if they went back, they were always worried, well, can I get back into the United States again? So I'm just going to stay.
So they stayed and just sent money back to their family when they...
And they married. And they had children. And they've now been here since the first ones since the 90s, meaning they've been here 20 years, or in some cases more.
So there's a lot of equity.
And so they're Americans for all practical purposes except the formal citizenship papers. Mm-hmm. We created that mess, and it started with Clinton, and it continued through Bush. It doesn't matter what the motivations were or the politics. What matters is we created a mess, perhaps inadvertently. It wasn't the intention to create a mess, but that's what happened.
It was an unintended consequence.
Exactly.
And
so now you have to, when you commit an act and there are unintended, even with the best intentions in your own life, and there are unintended consequences, you got to own them.
Yep.
And we have to own the fact that our immigration policy, for better or worse, or lack of immigration policy, if you want to call it that, created this mess. And now we got to own it.
Yeah.
And we have to create some rules that say, look, there's a path to citizenship for these people. Yes, they came illegally, but it was a result of a broken system. And we have to own the broken system. And for those people who've got tremendous equities, I mean, I'll tell you one family I met, the Avila family. Mr. Avila came illegally. He'd been in the United States 14 years, and he was a plumber working in South Carolina. He married. He had 5 children, all of whom are American citizens. He'd been working for the same plumbing firm for 14 years. And one day ICE comes in, about 6 months ago, rounds him up, because apparently this plumbing firm hired a number of other illegal aliens, and puts him in a jail that's hours away from his home, so his family can't see him. And he litigates his case, his right to stay. He loses, and he's deported after he's in jail for nearly a year.
And separated from his family after 20 years.
And they send him back to Mexico. The family just says, well, we don't want to be without our father, even though they're American citizens. They go to Mexico to live with him. And the only place he knows to go is Guerrero, this province where all this violence is, because that's where he came from. And they live there, and they get subject to the same threats or stuff that I've been talking about. And they come to the border, and now they're seeking asylum. Now, I'm not going to tell them that they have no chance of getting asylum, but that's another matter. But this is a man, who's got an American family and spent 14 years here and paid taxes and everything else. There's the case of Ana Maria, who lived here for 45 years illegally. She came as a little girl. She's a mother and a grandmother. Her children are American citizens. Her grandchildren are American citizens. She worked at Walmart for all these years, and then a supervisor position came open. So she applied, came down to her and one other woman, But Anna Maria is bilingual and the other woman wasn't, so most people thought Anna Maria was going to get the job. The other woman got word of the fact somehow that Anna Maria was illegal and called ICE. And ICE swoops in, Anna Maria is deported, now lives in Nogales, and the only time she gets to see her children and grandchildren if they can come down there, and most of the time they have to talk through a border wall, like a prison.
Gosh, that's so sad.
There are 1,000 stories like that, tens of thousands. If the whole family separation issue has not been covered well by the press because they've been talking about children taken from their parents, and that's a horrible thing, and of course it's very sensational. But the truth is, the deportation of adults who have American children and American families is far more common, and this is where tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands, I don't know the numbers, of family separations have taken place. And many of them stay in the border towns so that their family can at least come visit. So a lot of these people live in Arizona. Their families are American citizens, so they can go into Mexico and visit, but many of them won't because even though they're American citizens, in this current atmosphere, they fear they won't be able to get back. And there is a move, afoot to revoke American citizenship from people who were born here
by illegal parents.
It'd be hard to do because the Constitution says if you're born here, you're a citizen.
Yeah, right.
That kind of rhetoric scares people.
So, live and let live is your solution to the early 90s issue.
Right, a path to citizenship. And you can certainly create some burdens along the way. You have to have paid taxes and prove it. You have to show you haven't committed crimes. Or, we might exclude like driving offenses and stuff like that. But, we could bicker around the edges of good policy, who gets a stay. But right now we're not bickering around the edges. We just have a blanket. We're going to round you up and deport you.
So fast forward to today then.
So that's a very different situation than from the people who are coming to the border seeking asylum. Two completely unrelated problems that are the only thing they have in common is the title immigration.
So there are a bunch of asylum seekers today. We're in the biggest migration in human history. There's currently, 65 million?
Worldwide, you mean?
Worldwide.
Yeah, I don't know about the biggest one in human history, but it's certainly a large one. And it's going to get worse.
It's only going to get bigger.
Because of climate change, for one thing. And
sea levels rising and pushing people.
Yeah.
So how many is too many to let in? Is there a number before we created something where we don't have enough?
I don't know that you can create. I don't know that there's any way to put a number on it. There are some economists who actually who argue that if every country had open borders, that's the ultimate free market economy, and it would control itself, right? Because if resources start to get scarce here, well, people aren't going to come here; they're going to go somewhere where there are more resources. So I don't advocate that, but there is an argument to be made. There was an article in the Atlantic, I think, not long ago, by a very much left-winger who's a right-winger who's a libertarian, who argues for open borders and let the economy take care of it.
Do you think? How do you feel about that? Don't humans just consume everything and then move on to the next?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think that's a good idea. But
so there has to be some protection at our border.
We do have cultures, and the United States it's multicultural, but there still is some commonality to make us to say there's an American culture. We do all speak English.
Kind of that melting pot.
Yeah, it's not the same kind of culture as say you have in France, where it's more monolithic. But even if our culture is multicultural, there's still a culture of multiculturalism and certain things that we share. There's issues of national defense and how we tax and so on that requires that we have defined borders, I think. The difficult question is not so much how many, but what do you do with those people who are jumping out of the burning building? And so if right now we're sitting here in your home and you have limited resources, you have a job, but you support yourself and
barely,
barely, okay. And
I have to share this place with
and somebody comes knocking at the door and says, please let me in and stay because there's a gang chasing me and they're going to kill me. And you look across the street and indeed there's 5 guys with machine guns aimed at this guy, and you can either let him in or it's pretty obvious he'd be shot.
Yeah.
What is your moral obligation in that sense? You can say, look, I've only got 3 cans of tuna fish and I don't have enough to share with you. Or do you say, I can get by on a half a can of tuna fish today and a half a can tomorrow? And now this is the most extreme case. This is assuming your resources are really limited, which isn't the case.
I would want to let them in. I would be afraid of the gang coming after them, and just destroying my property anyway, because they want to get a hold of that person.
Well, okay, so that's not a perfect analogy, right? Yeah. But the idea is, what do you do with somebody who's legitimately running for their life? Let's take it out of the geopolitical and make it a little more personal. Let's say you could be assured if you you had a great security system of your own, and if you let the person in, the gang would be deterred and would leave.
Yeah.
So you're not worried about.
Yeah, I think I would. I would eventually want them to pull their own weight.
Yeah. Now, what if it's 3 people who show up at your door?
Yeah,
At what point do you say, "I'm sorry, you're just going to have to be killed"? And
it's hard. It's a hard decision. How do you feel about it?
Well,
I'd like to say yes.
The first thing that you want to know is are you really in danger? Because word gets out that maybe you're a softie and 100 people show up at your door and basically they're just looking for a place to live.
Yeah, and then I could lose everything that I have. Are people in the U.S. kind of scared of that?
Well, would
it be practical to want?
They're being prodded into fear of what I think is in most cases not a fear. The people who are presenting themselves for asylum right now, if we let all of them in tomorrow, it would only actually help our economy and help our country. There are all sorts of business owners complaining that they don't have enough workers. Right here in Manhattan, the dairy farmers can't find enough people to milk their cows. They pay $60 for a 9-hour shift, and it's all Mexicans who do it, and they don't have enough. There's all sorts of jobs that Americans just won't take, and many more than we have immigrants to fill them. So we're not really anywhere near facing a problem of where our resources will be depleted. And these people come here and they do this work and then they spend the money here. And that increases GDP. So if the president wants to talk about GDP growth as being the measure of economic success, the more immigrants you let in, the more GDP growth you're going to have.
It'd be interesting to segue this into automation.
Well, there is that's an issue.
There are no jobs in the future.
So, the high tech companies. Well, that's one issue. But right now, the high tech companies are begging to get for more immigration on these special visas that allow highly trained people to come in.
Yeah,
and they can't find nearly enough people. Now, this is a different issue than the guy who's milking the cows. And the government issues a certain amount of visas because the high-tech companies have a lot of lobbying power, but not nearly as many as they'd like. And so what do the high-tech companies do to satisfy their need? They offshore it. And so rather than these Indians, people from India, and Chinese coming and living here and earning a decent salary because these are good-paying jobs, and then spending that money in the United States, they stay in China and India, do the same work, and then spend the money in India or China. And given the way things work, they can do the work there just as well as they can do it here. And then there's another thing, and that is a lot of Americans don't want these high-tech jobs because many of them these days are project-oriented.
So it's only finite. It doesn't last.
No, it usually lasts, but you have to move. So they tell you, hey, Tate, you're going to be in Seattle on this project for a year and a half, and then we'll tell you where you go next.
Yeah.
And then after your project comes through, and then they say, we're moving you to Akron, Ohio, because that's where the next project is. And you say, well, I got kids in school and yada-da, and Americans don't want to do that. The Indian guy is only too happy to come over here and do that.
Because that's his entry point, his opportunity.
And if he has to move around, so what?
Yeah.
So that's another aspect of all this, is these high-tech companies that need these workers, and there's not enough of them. My son just finished his PhD in Princeton in computer science. He's one of the few Anglo people in the department. It's mostly Chinese and Indians. And he's going to work for a company where, at a PhD level, where he'll be one of a minority as being a white guy. So that's what's happening in the tech field. That's a different problem. But all of these people end up they're either going to spend their money in the United States or they're going to spend it somewhere else. Now, here's the catch, is that if they're working as a dairy farmer, they're going to get Obamacare. If they're legal, if they were to become legal, and their kids will go to school, and they may be more of a net drain on the economy because of the social services they'd be drawing.
Yeah, does that happen more than the other way around, what you described?
Well, it's not one or the other. You hope that these people will progress and move up, and like many immigrants have historically, and then
right. You got to start somewhere.
Contribute more. But yes, there is a certain amount of drag on the lower wage person who comes over at first. And if you let them in and let them avail themselves of social services, especially, you're required to educate. The two places really where it affects things are education and the cost of keeping a kid in school, because even if you're illegal, you're entitled to send your kids to school. And the second place is hospital emergency rooms, where they got to treat you if you're injured.
No matter what. No
matter what. If you have a life-threatening or serious injury. And so those are two, and that, of course, that cost gets passed along to everybody. So that's two areas where it is drag on the economy, slightly. On the flip side, there's a productivity boost. Just last night, we had on campus a Harvard economist who writes on this subject. And what he said is there's 1,000 papers, and they all come to different conclusions. Because it's very hard to figure out all the secondary and tertiary kind of effects of all of this. Right?
Yeah, there's so many. It seems like there's so many different truths around it.
Well, what happens to the dairy farmer in Manhattan, Montana, who can't find the workers to milk his cows? He goes out of business eventually. He can't, and that's a cost of not allowing immigration. But and then what happens is he can't buy his lumber at the hardware store. Because he can't find Mexicans to milk his cows. And so, in Colorado, I heard an interview of a peach farmer on NPR just a few months ago, who can't get peaches all ripen at the same time. You got a week to pick all your peaches, and if you got thousands of peach trees, that's a lot of peaches.
I love Colorado peaches.
Yeah, so I think Georgia ones are actually better, but okay, we could.
I'm from Colorado, so
okay. So what happens is you need a very intense workforce for just a couple of weeks.
And that in history has been Mexicans.
Yeah. Well, that's hard to get now because there are fewer Mexicans available, and the ones that are want to go to some place where they have constant work. They don't want to go somewhere for you there for a week or two. And if they're going to go, they're going to charge you a lot more money, which means it raises the cost to the farmer. He decided to actually bulldoze 80 or 90% of his peaches and plant other crops that come in, that ripen at different times, so that he can keep a regular workforce.
Yeah, isn't that smart of him to
It is,
to evolve?
But it also changes the economy. And so when you're talking about the economic effects, the prices of peaches are going to go up. There's going to be less peaches. And for you, a guy who really likes Colorado peaches and maybe doesn't have that, doesn't want to spend $5 for a peach, all of this reverberates in so many ways that you can argue whatever you want about the effects on the economy, but to say it's just a drain or it's just a plus, neither one of those are fair positions.
Yeah. I guess, agriculture in general, in my mind, does need a total revamp.
It's not just
maybe
agriculture.
being put in that position, though, will force farmers to really take change that they need seriously.
It's also the construction industry. If you go to the southeast, particularly after the hurricanes,
rebuilding everything,
they couldn't rebuild because they didn't have the workers. I listened to a story by the head of the construction trade union in Florida, who says we can't. It's going to take years to rebuild from these hurricanes because our Mexican workers are either being deported or they're leaving because ICE is. This is one of the first place ICE looks for you.
Of course.
And And we need those guys. We need those low income, relatively low skilled and medium skilled people. And they were paying $40,000 to $50,000 a year to these people, to the laborers, and they couldn't find them because of the immigration policy.
Do you think we'll learn our lesson?
Well,
Or evolve?
So the problem is that politically, this is a highly charged issue because the facts are obscure and difficult to nail down. As I said, just talk about the 36 border crossings, and everyone's got a different story. So it's very easy for politicians to just spin a tale.
One person story.
The immigrants are all murderers and rapists and scare people. This is an age-old political trick, and that is to demonize the other and then use that to build your political constituency. And it doesn't matter whether the demonization is based on anything real.
It is real in one or two or a few instances.
You can always get an anecdote of somebody who's an immigrant who committed a crime.
Right.
And it doesn't matter if 10 times more Americans commit the same crime. All you need is Willie Horton to scare the heck out of people. Politicians, Machiavelli first described this. It's right-wing politicians all around the world now are using the other, whether it's related to immigration or other issues, and was the classic Nazi tactic in Rwanda. And every other Holocaust where a group of people is demonized and made to be the other. And if it gets carried too far, the other becomes less than human. And therefore, as they were called in Rwanda, euphemistically, the Hutus called the Tutsis cockroaches was the word. In Nazi Germany, they were called vermin. Jews were called vermin. And so part of the process of demonizing them is to dehumanize them. Because once they're lice, vermin, or that was the argument of the Nazis: is we kill lice, don't we? You don't let lice live in your hair. We kill them. That's what Jews are like. They're not
kind of normalizing that mentality.
Yeah, and the same thing happened in Rwanda. And now in the last Trump rally in Michigan just this past week, he basically said liberals are to be hated.
Yeah. So you're sensing that familiarity and kind of parallel that's creeping up in the U.S.
There's any student of history can't miss it. It starts from you disagree with somebody to they're the enemy, to they're subhuman, to they don't deserve to live, and it's a very slippery slope.
Yeah.
And it's a very powerful slope that the more they don't deserve to live, the more your supporters need to kill them. They're convinced that these others are a threat to their very lives.
Do you have compassion towards people who you see as misinformed in that way?
It depends on the circumstances.
Under this circumstance, for Trump rally supporters who are chanting and might be misled in some way.
At one level, I have compassion for them, but at another level,
is that your practical side that you're about to say?
No, ask me the question is, do I have compassion for the German citizens who sat idly by and were perfectly okay with putting Jews in concentration camps and murdering them?
Because they didn't step up.
Because they didn't step up, or in many cases they didn't take any action to make it happen, but they knew it was happening, and as everybody did, and voted for that government.
Mm-hmm. And then it was too late.
Well, no,
by the time they figured it out,
they were good with it. That's why they supported that government. That's why the people, half of Israel is going to vote for Netanyahu because he hates Palestinians, and that's why in 2020, roughly half of Americans, whether it's 48% or 52%, we'll see, but will vote for Trump because they too believe in white supremacy and feel that people of color and LGBT people and so on threaten their very existence. And it's a natural thing to fear the other. It's part of our genetic makeup because the other can represent a threat. So to a certain extent, it's healthy to have some to be cautious around the other, right? Somebody that you don't know, somebody that's different. It's okay to be cautious, but politicians take that caution and through Madison Avenue kind of techniques, they take it from caution to a virtue to hate.
Yeah, kind of build that extremism.
And so I have compassion for the people who. So another question is a related question would say, do you have compassion for the people at Jonestown who got inducted into a cult and ultimately killed themselves? Yes, I mean, I have compassion for them, but at the same time, they're idiots.
I have compassion for idiots.
Well, okay, so we can have compassion, for idiots, and in some cases, really mean idiots. Now, not the Jonestown people, but the Nazi sympathizers in Germany who legitimized Hitler.
So, do you think every Trump supporter is a white supremacist?
Probably not every Trump supporter. I mean, there'd be no way to know that, but I think that either you're a white supremacist or you think white supremacy is okay, because there's no way to avoid the obvious conclusion that Trump supports white supremacy.
Is it okay to love your own race and want to protect it?
No. I mean, yes, that's perfectly okay. That's different than white supremacy.
I agree, but is there it seems like there's a little bit of gray area in like being proud of your race and wanting to protect it.
There's always a little bit of gray area, but it depends how you want to protect it. If you want to harm other people in order to protect it, then that's not okay. When Trump pretended like he didn't know who David Duke was. Come on, there's not an American.
Right, yeah, that's kind of misleading.
And when Trump said there are good people on both sides of Charlottesville, including the people who were chanting, "Jews will not replace us," and on again, there's 100 examples where I could give you where Trump has affirmatively encouraged white supremacy. And indeed, if you look at the white supremacist murders that have happened around the country, they all cite Trump or his policies as their inspiration.
He's kind of enabling it all.
At the very least. And if you look at the out there white supremacist website, the theology of white supremacy is anti-Semitism, right? And experts who study white supremacy, that's not my line. That's a commonly understood thing by the scholars and experts, is that they see the head of the people of color and gay people as driving it all are Jews, and so that they hate these caravans, but they'll say that George Soros is funding it, which is of course a lie. But that sort of the head, causing these caravans, which they see as a threat to white people, is a Jew. The guy who shot up the people in Pittsburgh in the synagogue said, "We got to stop the Jews. They're behind all the illegal immigration." You don't have to take my word. You can just go to any white supremacist website and read what they have to say about how Jews are behind it all.
Yeah, I know there's mostly anti-Semitic stuff around them.
So it's, the Nazis didn't start with the Jews. They started with gypsies, LGBT people, some other people with mental illnesses, and only eventually did they get around to the Jews. And that's why there's the famous, line by a Lutheran minister who says, they came for the trade unionists, but I was not a trade unionist, so I didn't speak up. And then they came for the gypsies, but I was not a gypsy, so I didn't speak up. And then they came for this one and that one, and I didn't speak up. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak up.
Thanks, Ed. I've been really looking forward to this interview with you, and I'm really looking forward to our April 15th event. Just appreciate you and sharing with me all of that. So
my pleasure.
That's a wrap on this episode. And as always, there's a lot to consider. But one thing is certain. As humans, we approach big topics from very different angles. This episode was brought to you by the Montana Governor's Office of Economic Development, the City of Bozeman, 10 Directions, Hatch, the Yellowstone Theological Institute, Montucky Cold Snacks, the Nova Cafe, Zocalo Coffee House, Whistle Pig Korean, Dean Zesty Booch, Bliss, the Sola Cafe and Market, Schenk Construction, Ben Johnson Photography, Loken Productions, Superfluous Industries, and Blunderbuss.
A special thank you to Katie Kaminsky, Tia Goebel, and Connor Mulvaney.
A shout out to our editors and media team, Pat Loken, Jessup Sandoval, Allison Gregory, Shannon Hughes, Jessica Byerly, Jacob Desch, Nathaniel Johns, and Nicholas Hill. Thanks as always to Debbie Shank, Joe Fedora, Ethan Hoare, and Elliot Canfield. Do you have an issue that's riddled by gridlock in your community? We want to hear from you. shoot me a message at tate@iaminterchange.org. That's tate@iaminterchange.org. Until next time, share airtime and don't ruin dinner.